The honor and the privilege of working with the Pennsylvania Convention of States team on a regular basis. And as I've said before, but don't tell anybody else, you guys are my favorite team. So I am up here and I'm not going to bloviate and talk because we have other people that have important things to say and they're much wiser than I. What I am going to do is I'm going to introduce someone who, it's funny, when she was introducing herself when we got here this morning to someone, I asked her, I said, what is your title? And it's kind of a long title. And she told them what her title was, and then she said, but I'm just Rita. And that's kind of the way I've always considered Rita. She's just Rita. She's the only Rita in COS. She's one of the more important people with COS in my mind, because her official title is, and it does describe why I think she's important. I have it here somewhere. Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs and Grassroots Affairs now as well, right? Yes. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of my favorite COS people that's not from Pennsylvania, Rita Peters.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I want you to know that I'm not here under false pretenses. I know Steve was very upfront with me that you wanted Michael Ferris this morning. I totally get that. You were right to want him as your first choice, but you got just Rita instead. So thank you for having me. You have a beautiful Capitol. You have an amazing team, and I'm always happy to come up here and talk with y'all. Americans are known for our innovative spirit, right? From Benjamin Franklin's electricity experiments to the Wright brothers' airplane and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, American ingenuity is a virtue, and one that we should seek to perpetuate. Few would question that our Constitution is one of the greatest American innovations. It is a work of pure genius, crafted by men who understood that because mankind has a corrupted nature, a system of checks and balances is essential to good government. And they expected all of those checks and balances to be used. Can you imagine if the president rubber stamped every bill that was ever passed by Congress just as a matter of course? Can you imagine if the Senate confirmed every single presidential appointment? We would not have a healthy operating government system. One of the most significant checks and balances in the original Constitution is the Article 5 Convention for Proposing Amendments. James Madison's notes of the convention clearly show that this process was added so that the states could intervene if Congress became overbearing and needed to be restrained. Because they knew the nature of man and the corrupting influence of power, they knew that the federal government would never put limits on itself. When you look at the condition of the federal government today, you have to wonder why the states have never used this check. Our national debt has already been referenced. It's unconscionable and unsustainable. $39 trillion? Really? What are we doing to our children and our grandchildren? But members of Congress know that the minute they start cutting back, they lose their chance of re-election. So they won't do it. And they can spend on pretty much anything they want to. That's because the General Welfare Clause, which gives Congress power to tax and spend for the general welfare, is not interpreted as the founders intended to tie federal taxation and spending to the specifically enumerated powers given to Congress. Unaccountable bureaucrats are crushing American innovation with their mountains of regulations, even though Article 1 requires laws to be made by Congress. That's because the Supreme Court interprets Article 1 to allow Congress to delegate its lawmaking power to agencies as long as it provides the agencies with an intelligible principle for guidance. Perversions of the Interstate Commerce Clause let Congress have power over many issues that should be left to the states. The courts interpret this clause today to let Congress regulate activities entirely within a state if they can be said to affect interstate commerce. These are just a few examples of the countless ways the federal government overreaches, and that federal overreach is now baked into our system because of written formal court precedents. Now, one of the favorite lines of opponents of Convention of States, raise your hand if you've heard this, and they always say it with this smug expression on their face. It's, the Constitution isn't the problem. Officials disobeying the Constitution is the problem. Anyone heard that? Yeah. Well, let's face it. That statement is ridiculously simplistic. Sure, if federal officials interpreted the Constitution according to the founders' original intent, what the words mean when they were written, things would be better. But the question for us is, once we have precedents that establish in our law that the Constitution can be interpreted in a different way, how do we fix it? Elect better people? Will that do it? No. We've been trying that forever. It doesn't work for the reason the founders knew it wouldn't work. People in power want to keep as much power as possible. Better people in Congress won't close the loopholes that have been opened in our Constitution. Even if they wanted to, they can't undo the precedents. The state-led Article 5 convention process is the answer, or at least it's the one answer our Constitution provides. And I'll give you an example of an amendment that has been used for this very purpose of correcting imbalances of power. It's the 11th Amendment. It was proposed by Congress and ratified by the states specifically to reverse a wrong Supreme Court decision, Chisholm versus Georgia, that had given the federal courts more jurisdiction than they should have had. With one simple amendment, the problem was corrected clearly and permanently. The 11th Amendment says, the judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to, and goes on. Now imagine an amendment today proposed by the states at a convention that reads, the General Welfare Clause shall not be construed to empower Congress to tax and spend for, fill in the blank. The Convention of States application, now passed in 20 states, seeks to propose constitutional amendments that impose fiscal restraints on D.C., place additional limits on its power, and set term limits for federal officials and bureaucrats. We need 34 states to convene the meeting, and proposals, as has already been mentioned, have to be ratified by 38 states, a very high bar. This is not about opening up the Constitution. It's not about rewriting anything. In a single sentence, Article 5 gives the Convention of the States the same power that it gives to Congress, the power to propose amendments to the Constitution we already have. If those proposals get ratified, they get added on to the end of the Constitution, just like the 27 amendments we already have. Nothing is getting opened up. Now, some people oppose our effort because they like big government. Okay, but to those who support our goals but continue to oppose this effort, we need to make sure they know that what they're so afraid of is a meeting where states make suggestions. It's not very scary. And those opponents need to own that the process they are opposing is a part of the Constitution they claim to revere, the one that our legislators took an oath to uphold. Now, some people will tell you that no one knows how the Article 5 convention process works. They're kind of like the Irishman who was charged with a crime witnessed by 4 different people. His defense was to bring 20 people who didn't see him do it. Claiming that you don't know something isn't any kind of evidence that nobody knows it. We do know how the convention process works because it's a process that was frequently used by the founders and others since then. It's how the states met to work out solutions to problems. It sounds really reasonable and rational, right? The agenda was always agreed to in advance. Every state got one vote. The states chose and instructed their delegates. It's just how it works. They always stuck to the agenda. The questions that the opponents throw out as rhetorical, how would it work? How would the delegates be chosen? All of those questions have answers that are backed up by documented history and law, including the U.S. Supreme Court's 2020 decision in Schiaffalo versus Washington. That case affirmed that states have full authority over delegates they choose to represent them in performing federal functions. Now we know our opponents peddle these fears of a runaway convention, a mythological event which has zero basis in history and zero basis in logic. People who won't support an Article 5 convention because they're afraid of a runaway might just as well refuse to leave their home in the morning because they're afraid a giant sinkhole could swallow them up. This is not how patriots or people of faith make decisions. While America is known as a land of courage, innovation, and ingenuity, she has always had her fearful doubters. Out of fear, many colonists refused to support the cause of their own self-governance, choosing loyalty to Great Britain instead. We know there are still those fearful doubters among us today, but let's all get this straight. The claim to reject an Article 5 convention because of loyalty to the Constitution is an oxymoron. In rejecting a convention, they are rejecting the Constitution. Their motivation is fear, and it is diametrically opposed to the spirit of courage and innovation that made America great. Can you imagine them explaining to George Washington, but it's never been done before? For our part, those of you here today, for Ruth's part, we choose action. We choose to trust in the process our Constitution provides for us for such a time as this, and to trust our Almighty Creator, who holds the affairs of nations in His hands. We choose to join the ranks of those who step forward to do the work instead of those criticizing from the sidelines. Thank you.